Wyoming Territory, August 1871. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Kenzie Cole slipped down the back slope of a low ridge, her boots kicking up dust as she ran away from the wagon train, away from the man her father had promised her to, away from a life that felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Her chest burned from the dry wind, her skirts torn at the hem from snagging brush. She had nothing but a threadbare shawl, the clothes on her back, and a sliver of dried apple she had pocketed at lunch. Her father would be furious, he would search, but she would not go back, she did not cry. She had done enough of that in the weeks leading up to this. Instead, she walked, through sagebrush and silence into the darkening land. The stars came out cold and sharp above her, and the land began to whisper with coyotes and the rustle of distant grass. By the time moonlight painted the hills silver, her legs shook with hunger and exhaustion. She collapsed beside a boulder, her arms wrapped around her knees. Every sound in the dark made her flinch, but no one came until morning. She woke to the jingle of tack and the slow crunch of hooves over dry earth. She sat up fast, heart pounding. A lone rider crested the hill, silhouetted by the rising sun. Dust clung to his coat, and his wide-brimmed hat shaded a face that was too quiet to be dangerous. He reined in his horse and looked down at her, unspeaking for a long breath. "You lost?" he asked finally, voice low and rough from the trail. Kenzie stood, swaying slightly. "No," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You look it." "I left," she added, her voice steadier now. "My wagon train's heading to Fort Bridger. I am not." The cowboy swung down from the saddle in one easy motion. He was tall, lean, and young, no older than 27, maybe. Dust clung to his boots and coat, and his shirt was patched at the elbow, but his eyes were steady. He opened a saddlebag, pulled something out, and held it toward her in a calloused palm. A torn piece of bread, rough and dry, but her stomach clenched at the sight of it. "It's all I got left," he said. "But you look like you need it worse." Kenzie took it slowly, fingers brushing his. "Why would you give this to me?" he shrugged. "Because I got a mother who raised me right, and you look like you ran hard and slept little." She sat again, chewing in silence. He did not press her. He crouched near the fire pit of a long-dead camp, drawing a circle in the dirt with a stick. His eyes flicked to her once, then back to the dust. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ira Nolan," he said. "And you?" "Kenzie Cole," he nodded. "You got kin coming after you, probably," she said, "but I am not going back." Her fingers clenched around the crust. "My father arranged a marriage." "He did not ask me." Ira's jaw tensed. "You got a plan." "I was thinking I would make one now." He stood slowly. "Well, I am headed toward the Big Horn Basin. I was driving cattle south, but they got sold off in Lander. Thought I'd see what the land looks like for myself." Kenzie looked up at him. "And I do not mind company," he said. "If you ride steady and keep quiet when needed, I can show you the way, and you'll have my fire and rifle to keep you safe." "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You are brave enough to run and smart enough not to cry about it." Kenzie looked at the ground. "I did cry, just not today," he smiled, just the corner of his mouth lifting. "That still counts," she nodded. "All right, I will ride with you." They started slow. He offered her his canteen, and she took only 2 sips. They shared jerky that night, and she listened to him hum quietly while he cleaned his rifle. The stars stretched endless above them, and the land was wide enough to breathe in. Ira never asked about her family again. By the 3rd day, Kenzie felt the dust of the trail settle into her bones, but she rode with her back straighter. Ira taught her how to find water by the willows, how to listen for snakes, and how to keep the saddle cinch from slipping. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, trading small stories. She told him about her mother, who had died in Missouri when Kenzie was 14. He told her about growing up near Abilene, about a brother who died in the war, and how he never thought he would stay in one place long enough to care for anyone again. On the 4th night, a storm rolled in. Wind swept across the canyon like a freight train, and lightning cracked over the hills. They took shelter under an overhang, huddled close. The fire smoked out, but Ira's coat was warm and his arm firm around her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked, voice close to her ear. She nodded, but her fingers curled into his shirt without thinking. "I do not want to be alone." "You are not," he said when the storm passed. Neither of them moved right away. His arm stayed wrapped around her and her head leaned against his chest. It was quiet. Safe. In the days that followed, their silences grew more comfortable. She began to smile again. He began to look at her longer when he thought she was not watching. On the 6th day, they reached a ridgeline overlooking a green sweep of land sloping down to a creek. Cottonwoods clustered along the water, and a few wild horses grazed nearby. Ira reined in his horse and looked over at her. "That is it," he said. "That is where I am going to build something." Kenzie looked at the land, then back at him. "You think it will hold?" "I think it has room to grow," he said. "Same as us." She looked down at her hands, then up at him. "Ira, yeah, do you think I could stay?" His face softened, eyes searching hers. "Kenzie, I would not want you anywhere else." Her heart thudded and her voice caught. "I think I started falling for you the moment you handed me that bread." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I gave you my last piece. I reckon my heart came with it." And in the quiet of the Wyoming hills, with the wind soft against their faces and the past far behind them, Kenzie leaned into him, and Ira kissed her slow, sure, and full of everything they had not said. Neither of them needed to say a word after that. The ground was still damp from the storm when Ira led the horses down to the creek. Kenzie walked beside him, her boots sinking into the softened earth. Morning mist clung low, curling around the cottonwoods like breath held too long. The quiet between them had taken on a different weight, no longer unfamiliar, but full of something waiting to settle. Ira crouched by the water's edge, cupping his hands to drink. When he stood, he wiped his mouth on his sleeve and turned to her. "You handy with a hammer?" he asked. "I've patched a roof," she said, "and split fence rails with my uncle before we left St. Joseph." "Why?" "I'm thinking of starting with a small cabin, just one room to begin. You'd have your own bedroll if that's what you want." Kenzie studied the row of cottonwoods lining the creek, then nodded. "I'd rather build something than sleep under the stars come snow." He ran a thumb across his jaw. "Then we'll start with a foundation near those pines, less wind through there." They spent the morning clearing brush with a borrowed axe Ira had carried since his cattle driving days. Kenzie gathered stones from the creek, laying them out in a line while Ira measured with a bit of twine and an old stake. Dust clung to her arms, but her shoulders didn't sag. By midday, she had tied her hair back with a strip torn from her skirt hem, and Ira had shed his coat, folding it neat beneath a tree. He glanced at her as she hauled another armful of kindling into the clearing. "You don't talk much while working," he said. "I think better when I'm quiet," she replied, dropping the sticks in a pile. Then, after a pause, "Do you believe people can be different than what they were born into?" "I believe the land changes you," he said. "Slow, like river rock. You stay in one place long enough, you start to fit it." Kenzie looked down at her hands, the knuckles scraped. "My father used to say women should learn to bend." Ira didn't answer right away. He tossed another branch onto the brush pile, then straightened. "And I figure women should learn to stand." She blinked, caught off guard. "You already do," he added. "You just don't know it yet." They worked until the sun climbed high, then sat beneath the pines to eat. Ira pulled a tin from his pack and opened it, dried beans soaked overnight and warmed that morning, seasoned with a bit of wild onion. Kenzie ate quietly, chewing slowly, watching a hawk circle overhead. He spoke again as he rinsed out their cups in the creek. "I'll need to ride to Medici in a few days. Get nails, some flour, maybe a draw knife if I can trade for one." Kenzie brushed dirt from her skirt. "Will you go alone?" He looked back at her. "Not if you'd come," she hesitated. "Town means eyes, questions. Could be you're just my help. Could be we've known each other longer than we have. Folks don't pry much there," Kenzie considered. "I'd come if we leave early. I want to see what's west of here." Ira nodded. "We'll ride at first light in 2 days. Gives us tomorrow to mark the cabin lines." You all right with that? I am, she said. I like having something to build. That night, the sky opened wide again, stars blinking out behind drifting clouds. Ira sat sharpening his knife by the fire, the steady scrape of stone on steel filling the silence. Kenzie mended a tear in her sleeve with a sliver of thread she'd saved in her shawl hem. Why here? She asked, not looking up. He laid the knife aside. I passed through once, years back. Thought it was the kind of place a man could settle and not be swallowed whole. Kenzie tied off the last stitch. It doesn't feel crowded, even the air feels like it's holding its breath. He watched her. You think you'll stay once it's built, she met his eyes. I'm not going back. And I have nowhere else in mind, he nodded slowly. Then we build something that holds. She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased and her hands went still in her lap. Later, when the wind picked up and the fire burned low, Ira stood and laid an extra blanket near her bedroll without a word. She didn't thank him, he didn't ask her to. In the stillness before sleep, Kenzie whispered, "Good night, Ira." He didn't move. "Rest easy, Kenzie," and for the first time in many nights she did. They rode out before first light, the low wind pushing at their backs as they crossed the open flats toward Medici. Ira's packhorse trudged behind them, hooves thudding in rhythm with the gelding beneath him. Kenzie rode bareback on a small buckskin mare he'd traded for the week before, her fingers tight on the reins, her jaw set. The land shifted as the sun climbed. Sage giving way to cottonwood groves, then open grass again, the soil darker near the river bends. A hawk coasted overhead for a while, then vanished toward the west. Kenzie kept her gaze on the horizon. Do you figure folks out here ever stop moving? Ira adjusted his hat against the glare. Some do. Others keep chasing something they don't know the name of. What about you? I used to think I had to keep riding to outrun what I carried, he said. Turns out standing still makes a man face it clearer. She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased. They reached Medici by late afternoon, a loose scatter of buildings pressed between creek and bluff. A livery, 2 supply stores, a blacksmith, and a saloon with a sagging porch. Smoke drifted from a chimney above the general store, mingling with the scent of leather and horses. Ira dismounted near the hitching post. Stay close. Folks here aren't cruel, but they notice strangers. Kenzie nodded, sliding down from the mare. Her boots hit the ground hard, the muscles in her legs stiff from the ride, but she said nothing. Inside the store, the shelves leaned under the weight of flour sacks, tin coffee, and rough-cut soap. A man behind the counter, maybe 60, with a white beard and a missing finger, looked up when they entered. New face, he said, looking at Kenzie. She's with me, Ira replied. We're building north of the Grable. Need nails, draw knife, and a sack of cornmeal if it's clean, the man nodded. Got a few blades left. Nails'll cost more than they did last fall. Ira counted out coins from a small pouch. Kenzie wandered to the back, eyeing the bolts of muslin and the tin stove piled with crockery. Her fingers brushed a folded apron, the stitching crooked but careful. She didn't touch it. She turned back and caught Ira watching her. Outside, the sun had begun to fall behind the bluffs, the wind picking up grit that stung her cheeks. Ira handed her the sack. You all right? I haven't seen this many people since the train, she said. It feels like looking through glass, he nodded once. You don't owe any of them a thing. Not even your glance. They loaded the supplies onto the packhorse. As Ira tightened the straps, a voice called out behind them, Nolan, I'll be damned. A wiry man with a limp came down the saloon steps, dust clinging to his trousers. His eyes flicked to Kenzie, then back to Ira. Didn't figure you for the settling type, thought you'd be halfway to Helena by now. Ira rested a hand on the saddle horn. Plans changed. You riding with her now? The man asked, jerking his chin toward Kenzie. Ira's voice stayed calm. She's got her own path. We happen to ride the same direction. The man grinned without humor. Just saying, not everyone out here forgets what came before. Kenzie stepped forward. You mean to say something, you ought to say it plain. The man blinked at her, surprised at the steel in her tone. Ira's eyes didn't leave the man's. We're done here. They rode out without looking back. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the trail. Neither of them spoke until the town had disappeared behind them. Kenzie broke the silence. He knew you. Drove cattle together 5 years back. He lost 3 fingers in a stampede and blamed everyone but himself. She considered that. He didn't like that I spoke. Most men like their women quiet if they've never known one worth listening to. Kenzie looked over at him, the wind pulling strands of hair loose from her braid. You always speak like books I never read. I don't mean to, he said. I just think more than I say. They made camp near a dry wash where cottonwoods leaned in crooked from the bank. Ira started the fire while Kenzie rolled out the blankets. The heat had drained from the air, leaving only the sharp smell of dust and bark. She stirred the cornmeal into boiling water, adding a pinch of salt from his pouch. He watched her, arms resting on his knees. You cooked before? He asked. Only for folks who never looked me in the eye. I do, he said. She handed him a tin plate. That's why it matters. They ate in silence, the firelight throwing gold across their faces. Ira set his plate aside and leaned back, hands folded behind his head. Did you ever think, he said, that peace might look like this? Kenzie stared into the fire. I used to think peace meant no one speaking my name, and now I think it might be someone saying it like it's safe. He sat up slowly. Kenzie, she turned to him. He reached out, fingers brushing her wrist. I want to build more than a roof with you, her throat caught. Then we'll build it slow, but we'll build it right. He leaned in, and she met him there, no words, just the quiet press of foreheads and the warmth of breath shared in the dark. The night stretched long and still around them, and for the first time in her life, Kenzie knew she was not waiting to be saved. She had chosen this. She had chosen him. By late September, the frame of the cabin stood in a clearing where the pines broke apart just enough to let the morning light spill down in long gold shafts. The walls were rough-hewn pine, notched and stacked by hand, the joints tight from Ira's careful measuring. Kenzie had cut saplings for roof poles, her palms raw but steady, and every piece of the build had passed through their hands together. The nights had grown colder, the wind carrying the bite of the mountains. At dusk, they burned cottonwood and pine needles, the smoke drifting low. The sound of hammering had faded now, replaced by the steady rhythm of life settling into place. Kenzie stood barefoot in the doorway, brushing wood shavings out with a broom made from bundled grass. Her shoulders were sore, and her braid was loose down her back. Ira was kneeling beside the fire pit outside, fitting together a cook grate he'd bartered for in meat-eatsy rusted iron but still strong. You reckon we'll get the roof sealed before frost sets in? She asked, leaning on the door frame. He looked up, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. If we keep pace, we'll have moss and pitch packed tight before the first snow. Might not be pretty, but it'll hold. I don't mind pretty, she said, but I'd rather not wake up with ice in my hair come November. He gave a low chuckle, then stood stretching his back. You sleep light. If there's ice, I'll wake first and stoke the fire. She stepped outside, the grass cool beneath her feet. What makes a man offer that kind of promise? I've seen enough cold to know I don't want you carrying it alone. She crouched beside him, her fingers reaching for the kettle. Tell me something I don't know about you. He hesitated, then picked up a charred stick and began drawing in the dirt. I once tried to tame a Mustang with nothing but a rope halter and half a biscuit. Kenzie raised an eyebrow, and got thrown so hard I bit clean through my lip. Couldn't eat without wincing for a week. She laughed quietly, then stirred the coals. You'd do it again, wouldn't you? I would, he said, but I'd bring more biscuit this time. As night settled, the wind rose through the trees. They sat close beneath the overhang, the fire casting shadows across the clearing. Ira passed her a tin cup, and she sipped slowly just hot water with a twist of dried mint he'd gathered near the creek. It helped the ache behind her eyes. Ira, he looked over, resting his hands on his knees. If we finish this by freeze up. What then? He didn't answer right away. The fire cracked and a moth danced briefly in the light before vanishing into the dark. We plant in spring, he said. Barley, maybe oats, clear more land. I could trade for a plow blade come March if the river doesn't flood too bad. Kenzie watched the flames. And me, his voice stayed even. Anything you want. Garden, chickens, or nothing but quiet if that's what suits. She reached for his hand, fingers curling between his. What suits is staying beside you. He didn't pull away. Then that's settled. Later, when she lay on her bedroll near the wall frame, her eyes caught the stars through the open roof. The wind whispered through the trees and the fire had gone to coals. She listened to Ira's steady breath nearby, the warmth of him just a few feet away, and felt something inside her quiet for the first time since Missouri. Not because she'd escaped something, but because she was building something new with a man who met her with more than kindness, with steadiness. And that was a kind of love she had never been given before. The last of the roof pitch was packed by the end of the first frost. Kenzie stood on the ladder Ira had built from trimmed pine limbs, pressing moss gently between the logs, her fingers stiff in the chill. Below her, Ira held the ladder steady, his breath rising in faint clouds. "You're pushing yourself hard," he said, his voice edged with concern. Kenzie didn't look down. "I want it finished before the deep cold comes." He didn't argue. When she climbed down, he handed her gloves without a word. Her cheeks were red from the wind, but her mouth was quiet, thoughtful. Inside the cabin, the smell of pine was sharp. The walls were sealed now, the roof solid. Ira had fashioned a hearthstone from river rock, and a fire burned low in the corner, smoke curling neatly through the stovepipe. A table stood near the window, rough but level, and 2 chairs sat on either side, one higher than the other to match the slope in the floor. Kenzie ran her hand along the tabletop. "You built this fast." "I built it with you in mind," he said. He stepped toward her, his fingers brushing a strand of hair away from her temple. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next." He waited, letting the silence stretch. "I want to grow roots here, not just stay because I ran from something. I want to choose this place," she said. "Choose you." Ira's jaw shifted, his voice low. "Then we do it together." "Every piece," she nodded, her eyes steady. "I'd like to marry you, Ira, not for safety, for belonging." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring of braided horsehair bound with a thin strip of copper. "I didn't have coin for gold. But I made this the night the roof went on." Kenzie took it slowly, her fingers trembling as she slipped it on. "It's perfect." They married beneath the cottonwoods 2 days later, wrapped in wool and morning sun. An old cattleman from downriver, who visited once a month to trade salt and news, spoke the words. His voice was rough, but steady. Kenzie wore her mother's kerchief tied at her throat, the only thing she had left of her past. Ira's hand never left hers. Afterward, they shared bread and boiled coffee with the cattleman, who tipped his hat and left with a small sack of oats as thanks. That night, Ira carried her across the threshold, not out of tradition, but because she had twisted her ankle climbing down from the loft earlier that day. She laughed in his arms, her head tucked against his shoulder. "You'll never let me forget that, will you?" "I might," he said. "If you kiss me first." She did, slow, certain, and full of every unspoken vow. The winter came hard. Snow piled against the cabin walls, and the wind howled through the pines like a chorus of voices long gone. But inside, the fire stayed lit. Kenzie mended Ira's shirts by candlelight, humming as she worked. Ira carved her a comb from juniper wood, the handle shaped to fit her grip. They read aloud from a water-stained Bible he kept tucked behind the hearth, not for scripture but for the comfort of words spoken into stillness. She read with quiet confidence. He listened with unshakable attention. When the snow thawed, they planted barley in rows that curved with the land. Kenzie spent her mornings with her hands in the soil, the sun warming her back. Ira built a fence to keep out elk, his boots caked in mud. By midsummer, the fields turned pale green. Bees hummed around the wildflowers near the creek, and the trees were heavy with leaves again. At night, they sat on the porch he'd built from leftover planks, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers curled around his. One warm evening, she looked toward the hills and whispered, I'm not waiting to feel safe anymore. I already do. He kissed the top of her head. It's not safety you found, it's home. Years passed, but nothing ever felt hurried. The cabin grew in small ways: a lean-to for tools, a second window to catch the southern light, a rocking chair he carved for her when her belly grew round with child. They named their daughter Clara, after Kenzie's mother, and she had Ira's quiet eyes and Kenzie's fierce heart. Clara learned to walk along the same creek where her parents met. She learned to read by candlelight and rode a pony before she was tall enough to reach the stirrups without help. Ira built her a stool so she could climb up on her own. They never spoke much of the past, not because it hurt, but because it no longer defined them. What mattered was the life they shaped with their hands, the kind that didn't need grand declarations to be understood. At night, when the world was still, Kenzie would lie beside Ira beneath the wool blankets, the warmth of their shared breath between them. She'd trace the lines on his hand, worn from years of work, and feel the solidness of everything they'd built. One evening near the end of summer, as the barley waved tall and golden in the wind, Ira looked out across the field and said, "It's all held." Kenzie stepped beside him, their fingers finding each other without effort. "So have we." And they stood there, side by side, the quiet strength of their love as steady as the land beneath their feet.